Hi, and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Shireen, and today I'm going to be doing a makeup tutorial. I really wanted to use the Sephora Pro editorial palette in a makeup tutorial. I've had this guy for, I want to say 4 or 5 months at this point, definitely a while, but I haven't used it in a video yet. Today I wanted to predominantly use the copper, gold, and maybe this shade right here in order to create, I'm thinking, a very coppery, bronzy cut crease. And I wanted to put the Urban Decay Razor Sharp gold liner right into the crease. You'll see what I mean in a bit. And for my transition shades, because the Sephora Pro editorial palette does not have a lot of transition shades, it's meant to be a very editorial-esque, very colorful, avant-garde, out there palette, I'll be using the Jaclyn Hill palette. As you can see, this one has lots of shades that can be used as transition shades, meaning in the crease, just to, as the name goes, transition between different colors, and they're a little bit closer to your natural skin tone, and so it looks less stark. So I think that's what I'm going to be doing today. I haven't fully planned out what colors I'm going to be using quite yet, so I think what I'm going to do is do one eye off camera, and then based on how that went, do the other eye on camera so you can see all the steps that I took. And if I, make mistakes or have to readjust, I think that's also valuable to capture on camera, because then you can see what kind of techniques I use. You can see what kind of techniques I use in order to fix my mistakes and to kind of come up with the best look that I can. So I went ahead and I did one of my eyes, and now I'm going to copy the exact same thing, meaning the same shades, the same brushes, same techniques on the other eye on camera, so that you can follow along and learn how I got this look. So whenever I'm doing an eyeshadow look like this, one that's a little bit more complicated, I always like to start by priming my eyes. And I've been using the Urban Decay Primer Potion. This is the original one. Now that the primer is on, the next step is to set the primer with something so that the primer doesn't move around. So in case you're curious, the point of using an eyeshadow primer is 1, to make your eyeshadow last longer, and 2, to cancel out any discoloration that you might have on your eyelids. So this might be because of veins, you might just have naturally very pigmented eyelids, whatever it may be, it lays down a base. But most primers are creams, and cream products move around a lot. So the way that we fix that is by setting it with a powder. You can do this either if you have like a powder that's like close to your skin tone, maybe a little bit lighter in your eyeshadow palette, or by using a setting powder. Since neither of the palettes that I'm using have a color that's close to my skin tone, I'll be using the Laura Mercier Translucent Loose Setting Powder. And what I recommend is to always have a brush. This is a brush that I got in my Urban Decay Naked Heat palette, but just to have a brush that you use just for this purpose, because then that brush is not going to get dirty, it's not going to have any other pigment on it, and you know that that's like your go-to brush for when you want to basically get powder on your eyelid without getting any kind of color on. Now that we have a base on our eyelid, we're ready to move on to the actual shadows. So I'm going to start out with the Jaclyn Hill palette. I'm using the shade Creamsicle with a little bit of Silk Creme in my crease right now. And for that, I'm going to be using a very, very big, fluffy blending brush from Morphe. This is the R37. And if you compare this to, for instance, another brush that I'll be using with this makeup look, you'll see how this one is much bigger and much fluffier. And that'll just disperse the color a little bit more, and it'll go out farther into your crease. So you always want to start with the lighter transition shade, and the lighter transition shade is the one that you want to go farther up. So I'm just going to put that in my crease. Another thing that I recommend doing is having a separate brush for every eyeshadow color that you know that you're going to be using, because then you know that things aren't going to get mixed. And at least when I do eyeshadow, it's a lot of layering and it's a lot of retracing your steps to make sure that your pigments from your original colors didn't get blended away. So as long as you keep those brushes separate, you know that you can come back and there's no risk of your eyeshadow becoming muddy or like a darker color getting mixed in where there's supposed to be a lighter color, because from that situation it's really hard to come back. You'll also notice that as I'm blending, I'm dragging the color into my inner corner. Because this is a relatively light transition color, I'm able to do this, but as I get into the darker colors, I'm going to try to be really careful about what I drag into my inner corner. And a lot of this is also about getting to know your specific eye shape. So if you look at my eyes real quick, I have like fairly large eyes, they're fairly round. Those are just very kind of preliminary observations about the eye shape. As you do more and more eyeshadow looks, especially more and more cut creases, you'll get into the specifics of your eye shape. So I know that even though they seem that they're round, this part dips in a little bit more and it flattens out right towards my inner corner. And I know that my eyebrow actually comes much closer to the inner corner of my eye than a lot of other people's, and that limits the space that I have to work with as I move in closer to my eye. So that means that I have to be extra careful as I do the darker transition shades so that I get that gradient of shades that I wouldn't otherwise be able to have. So now we have our first transition shade down. Next, I'm going to go in with a slightly smaller blending brush, and this is the Morphe M441. So this one's a little bit more pointed, and that's not going to drag the color up quite as much, which is a good thing because we don't want the color to cover up what we already laid down. So I'm going to use this, and I'm going to go into the color Hunts, which is this shade right here. So this is like a burnt sienna orangey color. And with a cut crease, it really doesn't matter what gets onto like your actual eyelid because we're going to cover that up with concealer anyway. So if you want to make a little bit of a mess there as you move forward, that's fine. Just be careful that your crease is looking the way that you want it to. You'll also notice that as I drag it into the inner corner, I'm trying to flatten out my brush so that I'm not getting a ton of red in here because that's going to darken up my eyes and close them up a little bit and make them smaller later on, and that's not something that I want. Now I'm going to go back in with the big fluffy blending brush and the original shades that I was using and just bring that color back. Not that we're done with those shades for the rest of the makeup look, but now I'm going to go in to my next transition shade, and this one's going to be much darker than the previous two. So for this one, I'm going to be mixing Jax, this shade, and Chip, this shade. I don't have a viewfinder, so I don't, or like a monitor or anything set up, so I don't know what you're seeing, but hopefully you're seeing the shades that I'm pointing to them. So this is going to be a Morphe M506. I actually have several of this brush. This is my favorite eyeshadow brush because it's so small and so precise. And I'm going to put that right into the crease, but I'm going to be careful to stay low, especially as I'm starting out, because when you're getting into these dark colors, you're not going to be able to blend them away as well. And it's much easier to build up color than it is to get it in the wrong place and try to fix it. Now I'm going to go back in with the second color, Hunts, and I'm going to reapply that. And back in with the first color, Creamsicle and Silk Creme. Trying to make sure that it's even on both sides. So now I'm going to go in with a black. So this is just called Abyss. And I'm going to take it on another Morphe M506 brush. I like to always have a separate brush that I keep just for black, because once you put black pigment on a brush, especially if you're working with like a true black as opposed to with a sheer black, like that's it. You're not going to get it off, and it's going to make any other color that you use that brush with darker. So just very carefully into the crease in order to darken it up. Now I'm going to go back with all of the shades that I used earlier and just darken them a little bit more, get that color in to make sure that we're not losing it or blending it away. Okay. So now I think that I'm ready to actually cut the crease, which means to use concealer to define an area on my eyelid. And this is a really good stage to take a close look in the mirror and ask yourself if you're happy with what you have. Because once you cut the crease, you're not going to be able to blend over it anymore. You're just going to apply pigment straight onto where you put the concealer. And if you're going to blend over it, then you're going to get eyeshadow all over the concealer, and it's going to kind of defeat the purpose of having done it in the first place. So make sure that you're really happy with what you have at this point, and that everything looks blended, it doesn't look patchy, that you have that gradient of transitions that you wanted to have, and then cut the crease. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and cut the crease. In order to do that, I'm going to use my Tarte Shape Tape in the shade Medium. I find that Shape Tape is a great concealer to use to cut the crease because it kind of sets itself. Like, by that I mean that it dries down pretty matte and doesn't move around. More dewy concealers like the Bare Minerals one or the new Born This Way one, the sculpting concealer that came out, are going to move around, and I wouldn't recommend those for cutting the crease. I'm also going to take a smaller packing brush, and I'm just going to get some concealer on there. Now for me, when it comes to cutting the crease, and again, this is something that you're going to have to play around with and really get to know your eye shape and how far up you should take it, but for me, it's really about starting slow. Because a tip that a lot of people are going to give you is going to be to like put some concealer on here and then like look up as much as you can, and then it's going to transfer and you're going to know where you should be cutting the crease. However, if I do that, it transfers up so far high that it's kind of like pointless. Like it's going to cover up any eyeshadow that I have and it's not worth it. So I'm just going to kind of not use too much as well, because if I use too much, again, it's going to transfer, it's going to get in the wrong place. But I think a lot of people are scared of doing a cut crease, and once you get used to it, it's not too bad. But like doing a winged eyeliner, even when it's comfortable for you, you want to have a lot of focus. Okay, so to me that looks pretty good. It looks like it matches the other eye. It's not incredibly sharp, to be honest, but I think that it's good enough. I have two packing brushes set aside to achieve this kind of gradient of color that I have, going from the bronzy coppery shades into the gold on my inner corner, and those are from the Sephora Pro palette. I'm going to start out with this shade right here, and I'm just going to put it on the outside of where I have the concealer. A lot of this is going to get covered up by like dark shades that I'm going to put on the outer corner, but it's still good to apply it. And you'll notice that I'm using the brush completely dry at this point because these are really good shimmers and they're going to have that impact and that pigmentation regardless of whether the brush is wet or dry. But a technique, in case you're not familiar with this, that a lot of people like to use to get more impact out of their shimmery shades is to wet the brush with setting spray or even with water in order to really make the eyeshadows pop more. I'm also going to use this shade right here, and I'm going to pack that on next to this one using the same brush. They're honestly very similar shades, and I find that it's really not worth it for me to sacrifice another brush for a slightly different color. However, the shades do have like kind of different formulas. The first one that I use is a lot creamier and is also less shimmery. And I think that's because the second one has more glitter particles in it and those make it chunkier, but you know, sparkly. Now I'm going to take another packing brush. This guy, this one's slanted. I like to use the slanted one as I go towards my inner corner just because it fits the shape of my eye. But if you're using a smaller packing brush or a packing brush that you're comfortable with, the shape is not really necessary. For packing brushes, you just want something that's dense and easy to control. Dense because then it picks up a lot of pigment. Put that towards the inner corner and I'm going to blend it in to the other shade. This, by the way, sorry, I keep forgetting. This is the gold shade here. Now I'm going to go back in with the other one, pack a little bit more. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that for now. And then before I go into the liner, I'm going to do the outer corner because that part's still incomplete. To start out my outer corner, I'm going to take that Morphe 506 brush that I said I keep just for my black eyeshadow. And I'm going to take a bunch of that Abyss shade from the Morphe palette, and I'm just going to pack it onto the outer corner. Don't worry about making a mess here because we're going to wipe that away with a makeup wipe pretty soon. But be careful to maintain the gradient on this area because you don't want to go back and have to redo that. Okay, so now that I've packed on a lot of black, I've gotten kind of some of the depth that I really wanted, and now I'm going to go back in with Jax and Chip and create the gradient going into my kind of coppery orangey shades. Now I'm going to pick up the packing brush, go into that darker bronzy copper, lay it back on there, and then back in with the matte shades. I'm checking with this side to make sure that I'm getting it the same distance in. Okay, now I'm going to go back in with the black and darken it up on the outer corner. So I'm going to move on to the Razor Sharp Urban Decay eyeliner. So we have this guy right here. This is actually, I think, a pretty amazing product. I think that there's a lot of glitter in there. I think that it's super pigmented on the first go, so you don't need to go over it a million times and potentially mess up a million times. And once it dries down, it does not budge. So for this part, I'm just going to start on the inner corner and then do small strokes to bring it up into the crease as far as I did into this one. Also added a fair amount of it on the inner corner just because it's so sparkly and I liked how it looked. Also, as it dries, try not to move your eye around too much or blink too much because then it's going to transfer and be less precise. So next, I'm going to take a makeup wipe and I'm going to create the sharp edge that I have here on this other eye. And here, what you want to be careful to do is to start on the outside and then move on to the inside, because if you start on the inside and drag it out, then you're going to drag some of that dark powder out with it, and that's going to create like a line along where you want that clean, sharp cut. Okay, so that looks pretty even to me. This is also a great opportunity to wipe any fallout that you have in your under eye area from the shadows. Glitters generally have fallout, darker shades tend to have a fair amount of fallout. Anything that's softly pressed, meaning that the eyeshadow formula is softly pressed, will tend to have more fallout. We're ready to create our base for our face makeup, and then we'll go and do the lower lash line for our eyeshadow. So I'm definitely someone who likes to use facial primers. I know that there are a lot of people who are very good at makeup and who I respect so much who say that primers don't do anything on them. On me, I feel like they work. So it's really an artifact of your skin type and the specifics of your skin. And the skin is such a complex organ, and I think it is the biggest organ in your body. I feel uncomfortable, honestly, making recommendations for face products to people, especially foundations and primers, because everyone's skin is so different and there are so many products that I love that, make my friends break out. So take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt. This is just what I like and what I find works for me. So, find the primers and the foundations and the other face products that work for you. And if you want to try out the stuff that I like, go ahead. But, don't necessarily think that it's going to work for you just because I like it. So I'm going to go in with the NARS Pore and Shine Control Primer. I only use this on my T-zone because my T-zone is the area that tends to get oily throughout the day. On the rest of my face, I'm going to use the Laura Mercier Hydrating Foundation Primer. Using the NARS All Day Luminous Weightless Foundation. This is my holy grail for when I'm doing full coverage looks like this one, and I'm going to probably be mixing shades because I think I'm in between. This is shade Santa Fe, medium 2, and this one is Barcelona, medium 4. I'm just going to pump this onto my hand. Let's do a couple of Santa Fe and then a couple of Barcelona for now. And I'm just going to take my damp beauty blender and tap that onto my skin. So I would describe this foundation as fairly full coverage. It's technically medium to full, but to me, if you see, I have some acne there, and I think that covered it up pretty well. So to me, this is full coverage, but it really depends on how much pigmentation you have to cover up. I also used a fair amount of product just now, so that was a total of 4 pumps. and that covered up just half of my face. And there are definitely people out there who will use 2 to 3 pumps for their entire face. So really, you know, how full coverage a foundation is has to do with how much of the foundation that you're using as well. Careful about this line that you have here so that you are getting foundation up to that line, but that your technique for applying your foundation isn't messing up that gorgeous gradient that you worked so hard to establish. And then I always find it helpful to drag the foundation down my neck a little bit, just to get a little bit more of a blend and like sheer it out as I go farther down my neck. So now that we've got the foundation, I'm going to do concealer. So I'm going to go back in with my Tarte Shape Tape in the shade Medium. This is not going to be incredibly brightening for me at this point, but I don't love the brightening technique that is super popular right now. I think Mario and Kim Kardashian, Makeup by Mario and Kim Kardashian, were big proponents of it. I don't know if they actually created the brightening technique because there's so much appropriation, particularly from the drag community within the makeup community, but they definitely popularized it. And a lot of people love how it looks. I am not one of them, especially not on me. I think that when I use a concealer that's light, that's intended to brighten my under eyes, it ends up just looking really ashy and really like flashbacky and weird in photographs. So it's not my favorite. And something else that I like to do is once I blend out the concealer that I put on my under eye area, I'll take the beauty blender with the residue of that concealer and I'll tap it onto other areas where I want coverage, but where I don't necessarily want to directly put that concealer because it's going to look potentially heavy, potentially cakey, so on and so forth. And then that like sheared out concealer will get me a little bit more coverage and a little bit more pigment without looking too heavy in those areas. Okay, so now that I have my concealer on, I'm going to set my face. And I'm going to start out with the Laura Mercier Translucent Loose Setting Powder that I used to set my eyelids earlier on in the video. So I have a bunch of that here. And I'm just going to take my beauty blender, get some of the setting powder on there, and then set my under eyes. This technique is called baking. And the distinction between baking and setting is when you bake, you put an excess of powder on your under eyes that you're going to wipe off later. And it really depends on your individual skin type and your preferences for how long you like to leave the bake on. For me, since I tend to have more dry skin, I don't really like to leave it on for that long. So I normally just bake under my under eyes and then I set the rest of my face. I'm going to be using another product for that, and then I wipe off the bake right away. Other people like to bake under their under eyes, do the rest of their face makeup. Maybe if they haven't done their eyeshadow yet, do that. If you've ever seen Patrick Star like tutorials, he'll just dunk his entire face in powder and looks absurd, but you know, Patrick Starr's makeup is always flawless, so it really depends on what technique works for you. I definitely could not do that. My skin would look so dry and like gross if I were to do that. So you know, play around, see what works for you. Because my skin is dry, I don't want to use the Laura Mercier setting powder. What I actually want to use is this Becca setting powder. That's actually fairly innovative. It comes like this, and you open it and has this little netting. And I like this setting powder because it's 50% water and glycerin. So what that means is that it's super hydrating. And I just tap it on. And it helps keep my makeup in place, but it doesn't make my face look super dry. This is a big Morphe E41 brush. So I just use it for powder. And this powder feels wet. Like, it's definitely powder, it's definitely dry. But it feels wet as you tap it onto your face. Now that I've set my makeup, I'm going to wipe off my bake. I'm just going to be using the Morphe M437 for this. This is my dedicated brush, and it's not so much because it's like you need such a specific brush in order to do this. It's more that I have this brush set aside for this purpose so that I know that it doesn't get dirty and doesn't get anything else on it. So for the lower lash line, I'm going to take this BH Cosmetics blending brush and I'm going to dip it into Creamsicle and Silk Creme. So those were the shades that we used as our initial transition shades. And this is just like a technique that I generally like to use when doing my lower lash line, is use the same transition shades that I used in my crease and generally build them up. Now I'm going to take that same brush and I'm going to dip it into Hunts, which is the kind of burnt sienna coppery shade, and apply that to the lower lash line as well. Okay, now I'm going to take that M506, yeah, got it right, that M506 brush that I used to deepen it up with the Jacks and the chip shades, and I'm just going to use that on the outer edge of my eye. So the idea here is for the lower lash line to really mimic what you have up top on the lid. Now I'm going to take that packing brush and do the same thing with the shimmers in the places that kind of corresponds to them based on where they are on the lid. Next, I'm going to move on to contour. So to contour, I like to use this angled BH Cosmetics brush. It doesn't have an identifier on it, unfortunately, and I like to use the Hoola bronzer, which I've hit pan on. This is a great matte bronzer. I find that it isn't patchy, blends super well, and I'm just going to use that to contour. Since I have a fairly warm skin tone, I'm able to use a bronzer as a contour shade because it looks a little bit more cool on my skin than it might on a more neutral skin tone. But if you have a more neutral skin tone, then you might want to use a powder that's intended for contour. Something that's super important to me also when I'm doing my contour is not to just do a line here and a line here, because I find that this area tends to look a little bit neglected and a little bit unfinished. So I really like to dust it all around. And then I'm going to use that same powder to do my forehead, just to get some dimension up there. Not necessarily as a technique to make my forehead look smaller. Okay, next I'm going to take this fairly densely packed BH Cosmetics brush to do my nose contour. Nose contour is definitely something that I'm less comfortable with, less confident in my skills in. I find that this brush makes it a little bit easier for me, but I definitely don't, claim to be any kind of expert at doing my nose contour. It's something that I'm pretty insecure about. And I think also is very, very specific to you and, once again, your nose. So just like I was talking about how important it is to get to know your eye shape, I think it's so important to get to know your nose shape if you're going to be contouring your nose, because any little bumps that you have, the powder is going to catch on to, and it's important to know where they are and know how to adjust your technique to account for them so that you're not accidentally emphasizing something. That's about as much detail as I feel comfortable going into for this, especially because, as my viewer, I'm not sure who you are or what your nose looks like. I just know my nose and kind of what I like to do. Let me kind of brush it up, just to soften it. Another technique that I like to use to soften up my nose contour is to just take that beauty blender and apply it to the sides. Next, I'm going to take my Becca bronzer. This is in the shade Capri Coast, and this is a fairly shimmery bronzer, but since I'm doing a very bronzy, glowy look, I figured that it won't hurt too much. And I'm going to take this on my Becca R2 and just tap it in and lightly go over the areas that I contoured earlier. This is a pretty light color on me. It looks, I think, fairly natural, and it's just going to give a little bit of glow. Next, I'm going to be doing my brush, so I'm going to take my Morphe M530, and this is Luminoso by Milani, very cult classic kind of peachy blush. And I like to apply blush to the apples of my cheeks. I know a lot of people prefer not to do this, but I think that it just looks very sweet and very cute. And I especially hate the technique where you blend your brush right into your contour and then it looks like this very pinky brownie shade all along here. I think that that makes it look nice when you're looking at someone head on, straight in their face. But once they turn their face, I think it looks just super unnatural and muddy almost. And this blush has a little bit of a sheen to it. I do have some texture on my face right now, but I still love how healthy and glowy it makes me look. Next, I'm going to go in with some highlight. I'm going to be using two highlighters today. So my first highlight is going to be a fairly natural highlight that's close to my skin tone. It's just going to give me a little bit of glow. And then my second one is going to be a lighter highlight. So first, I'm going to start off with the shade Mirame from the Dose of Colors Desi and Katie collab. I'm going to take this on my Morphe M510, and I'm just going to dust that all along here. And since it's a color that's fairly close to my skin tone, I can be a little bit more free-handed with it, and it's just going to give me a little bit of a glow. Nose highlight is my favorite. So now that we've got that done, I'm going to be using the Mary Lou Luminizer by The Balm. This one was a really popular highlight early on when highlighters were starting to become like a thing and not that many companies had come out with them. Mine has been used so much that it's kind of like fallen apart and shattered and broken in the middle because I hit pan so hard. So for this, I'm going to take a very small brush. This is a very small packing brush, this guy right here, and I'm going to be using this on my inner corners, on my brow bone, and also on like parts of my nose and cheekbones where I really want there to be some brightness. And then I'm going to apply some to the tip of my nose, kind of along the bridge here. Next, I'm going to take that big brush that I used to highlight earlier and lightly pat it and just add a little bit on my cheekbones. Okay, so that's highlight. Next, I'm going to do eyeliner. I like to use the Makeup Forever ink liner because I find it to be super dark. I think that it doesn't smear on me. That said, I think that it's super liquidy and fairly hard to use, so it's important to really take your time, not apply too much, go slow, and be careful with it. I don't think that I'm going to be doing a cat eye today, just because I feel like there's enough drama on the eyes as is, but I do like to apply liner in general with a heavy makeup look because it helps hide the band on my false lashes, and because if my mascara transfers up a little bit, which given my eye shape it generally does, it doesn't force me to have to go back and fix this super complicated eyeshadow look. The liner is just going to cover it. Okay. Eyeliner is on. I don't think that I'm going to tightline today just because I feel like tightlining irritates my contact lenses and it's a step that I would rather avoid. Even though I do think that it helps clean up the makeup look and, you know, it covers up any gaps that there might be where your flush tones are peeking out where you want darkness instead. So now I think I'm going to do my eyebrows. I'm going to use Benefit Precisely My Brow in shade number 6. This is the darkest shade to start out with, and I'm going to do hair-like strokes towards the front. This is just my typical brow routine. It's not something that I change up too much based on the look that I'm doing. If I am doing a lighter, less full coverage look, I might go in with a lighter hand, but it's the same stuff, honestly. And then I like to fill in a little bit more as it comes up to here. And for me, I always go in with a pencil first. I know that there are people out there who can just do brow gel and it looks, you know, pretty good and pretty done, but that works on people who have very fine hairs and the brow gel just picks up on those hairs and darkens them and, you know, volumizes them. For me, towards the front of my brows, I don't have very many hairs at all. The few that I have are pretty coarse and pretty thick, but there just aren't that many. So there's nothing for the brow gel to really pick up on. So all the brow gel does is clings to these hairs and darkens it up on the outside and doesn't do much towards the front. And so I do like to use brow gel later on to kind of set my eyebrow hairs and keep them from moving around too much, but it can never be the one product that I use. And then before going in with the brow gel, I like to brush out my brows a little bit with just the spoolie at the end of the brow pencil to really straighten everything out and to maybe, you know, make the lines that I drew less harsh. Now I'm going to go in with the Anastasia Tinted Brow Gel in the shade Espresso. Yes, in the shade Espresso. This lightens my brows a little bit, which is not a bad thing. I think the general rule is that it's good for your brows to be a little bit lighter than your hair. Okay, now that I've got my brows on, I'm going to set my face with my Urban Decay All Nighter Setting Spray. The purpose of this is just to make my makeup wear longer and wear better. And notice that I'm doing this before I put on my mascara because I feel that if I do this after I put on my mascara, then it's going to make the mascara wet and it's going to make it transfer a lot, and mascara transferring onto like my crease is a huge problem that I have. And with a makeup look like this, I really don't want to like go back in and fix it. So first, setting spray. Gonna look shiny for a bit. This is normal. It's not gonna mess anything up. What it is gonna do is help your makeup really melt into your skin and really help those powders mesh together. So now that my setting spray has dried a little bit, you see that it gave this nice sheen to my face. I feel like everything looks a little bit less powdery, and now I'm gonna go in with mascara. So this is a Benefit Roller Lash Mini. If you know me, you know that I only use minis. And the reason for that is that I find that mascara dries out so quickly on me that if I buy the larger size, it's gonna be dry way too soon and it's gonna waste a lot of the product and I'm not gonna end up using it. Mascara is something else that I don't really feel comfortable recommending to people because I find that the stuff that I love, my friends don't love, and the things that my friends love, I don't tend to love as much. It varies so much from person to person, and I really do think that it's about your eye shape and, you know, what's the mascara wand shape like and how does that interact with like the folds of your eyelid and like, you know, how long are your lashes, how densely packed are your lashes, do they curve up, do they curve down? Like I've tried curling my lashes and I don't really think it makes a difference on me, but on some people it makes the world of the difference because it makes it seem like suddenly they have lashes because their lashes are pointing down normally. So I think that that varies a lot. That said, I find that for me, what I want from mascara is for it to be more lengthening than it is volumizing. And I want those like perfect like fake lash lashes. Like I don't want them to be clumpy and spidery. I know some people love that look. I just want them to be long and separate and just perfect. I'm actually really loving how that's looking right now, mostly because my lashes were very clean when I started out this makeup look, and I find the mascara applies so much better on clean lashes for me, because otherwise they just clump up. So now while I wait for my mascara to dry, I'm going to pick a lip color and do my lips, and then I'm going to apply false lashes, and then we'll be done. For my lip color, I'm between Lolita 2 and this fiery red. This is Anastasia, I think it's called Spicy, yeah. We're going to go with Lolita 2, the nude. I don't generally use lip liner because, well, so it depends on the formula. If I'm working with a really good formula and a color that's not too dark, I won't use lip liner because I find that I don't need it. But if I'm working with a formula that's super drying and I want to create another barrier between my lips and the lipstick, or if I'm working with something that's really patchy and I'm afraid that I'm not going to have even, you know, pigmentation if I go in with just the lipstick, then I will use a lip liner. But this is a nude color, so I'm really not worried about patchiness, and I know that it's a good formula. I don't really like to overline my upper lip too much because I think that it looks very, very obvious when, not just I do it, when people do it, because that light catches on your cupid's bow, especially because I just highlighted my cupid's bow. But I do like to overline on my lower line because I feel like I have this like little bulge. Again, it's all about knowing your face and, you know, what your face needs. But I feel like I have this little bulge where it's like my lip color doesn't extend to it, but it still feels like it's my lip. So I apply lipstick right on there. And I also like to drag the lipstick pretty far down on this part of my lower lip because the shadow covers it. And again, it's harder to tell, but it does make your lips look plumper and fuller. Okay. So I don't think that I'm going to go over this with a gloss or another lipstick or anything else, because this is a matte liquid lipstick, and I find that when I do matte looks, I know that there are people who disagree with this but I find that when I do matte lipstick, my lips tend to look fuller and plumper, and once I put the gloss, it makes them look thinner, and I'm not really sure why, but that's my experience. So I like this for now. So next, I'm going to go in with false lashes. I think for this look, because I have that darkness, it has like that kind of cat eye effect, I want to do lashes that are going to augment that. So I'm going to go in with my Ardell magnetic lashes. These are some of my favorites. And they're just outer corner lashes, essentially. So they look like this. And you can see that they tend to be longer as you go towards the outer corner, and that helps create that cat eye look. And I know magnetic lashes are kind of newer onto the scene, and a lot of them, especially the full ones, these are demis, so half, but the full ones can, you know, look not so amazing because you can see the little magnets on them, but I feel like the demis are fantastic. I think that they are easier to apply than lashes like regular falsies that require glue. I feel that they wear better throughout the night because it's not like the magnet gets weaker as you go throughout your night, but the glue on falsies generally does get weaker. So I like them for that reason as well. And you know, I find them pretty easy to apply. I find regular falsies to be super hard to apply. I think that they're the hardest part of like a full face of makeup for me personally. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply these. This is probably not going to be included in the final cut of the footage because it takes me probably like on average 3 or 4 tries to get the placement exactly right. But I'll be back with lashes. Alright, so I have my lashes on and my little kitty headband off, and that's it for this makeup look. Hopefully you either learned something or you enjoyed watching it. I definitely enjoyed filming it for you, and maybe I'll see you back to my channel for my next video. In the meantime, have a great rest of your day. Bye!